Okay, I think that we can go ahead. I am first on the list, so I will go ahead and just share my screen and get going. You should be able to see my GDK. I just want to make sure if anyone gives me a thumbs up on that. Okay, cool. So just giving some context to what we'll be checking out today, this is part 2 of the Jobs to Be Done initiative, which is a recommendation. So what we're going to be looking at is what we call the security dashboard, and there's going to be several issues created, but really this one focused on a front-end fix that we can focus on, just as Pedro calls it, an easy win. And so it's a little bit less involved with adding too much functionality. So that's why we prioritize this one as the recommendation. As with most things in security, certainly with the security dashboard, it's important to note that the dashboard is at a very early stage. So, you know, we're figuring out a lot about it, and this recommendation in of itself has surfaced a lot of really good questions and action items to learn more about our user. But with that, who are we designing for? We are designing for organizations' web security department. For larger organizations, the roles would include security analysts, security engineers, head of security. However, for smaller organizations, they could benefit from this that, you know, maybe don't have a web security department. Would maybe be the tech lead, the CTO, the developers themselves, DevOps engineers. Those would be some of the titles. The page is intended to provide the user with an overview and awareness of vulnerabilities over multiple projects, while providing the ability to resolve and address the security concerns that are listed. Just a quick side note, I put in some related issues. There's some really exciting work that's been done that Andy's been working on in terms of navigating from vulnerability to vulnerability. Right now on the table, it just opens a modal, and it's not a great experience, but we're really excited about some of the new stuff, the navigation from it. This recommendation today will be focused on the layout. So I'm looking at the GDK, and just to put this more into context, how would the user get here? The page is found at the group level or the project level. We'll take a look at the group level. So just here in the sidebar and overview, there's a security dashboard. So we'll open that up. So viewing the job to be done in context, now that we're here, the job to be done that we'll be considering for this is, when reviewing vulnerabilities for multiple projects, I want to see them all in one location so that I can prioritize my efforts to resolve or triage them while seeing the larger picture. Okay, so I just have the issue here to walk through this. The first issue is that we're not seeing the vulnerabilities right away. This is a pretty large screen, and most laptop screens may be a little bit smaller and in terms of aspect ratio. And when we first land here, the user cannot see the actual vulnerabilities. The other thing is this chart takes up the whole space, so it's pushing those vulnerabilities down. This high-level summary is, the goal with that summary is just to kind of give the user an idea of what their projects are looking like. Maybe they can focus their efforts now with this data. Oh, I see 2 critical, I see 1 high. Now I can filter it down. So let's say that I filter it down to critical. Well, that changes the data indeed. However, it could be misinterpreted because we're still showing these data points even though it's filtered. So it's not a good data visualization practice. And again, it's pushing down the information. This is the most important thing that we want for the job to be done, for the user to get here, to check out the vulnerabilities. So our goal is, with the recommendation, is to create a layout that brings the most important data right to the top. So let me just open this up. Okay, so when we approached it, we thought about it in terms of what's the primary data and the secondary data. And with this layout, and also, you know, it's a front-end focus change. So with this layout in annotation 1, this could contain the header and filters. Annotation 2 is the primary data, which is the vulnerabilities, so bringing that up right to the top. And then annotation 3 contains secondary data, which is the summary, vulnerabilities over time, and the recent branch update. That is a data point that's not currently on there. It is at the project level, but we'd like to bring that data at the group level as well. Just a consideration at smaller screen sizes, that aside could take up the space, or maybe it could be removed so that you could bring those vulnerabilities right to the top, but that's just a secondary consideration. Okay, so how this would look with bringing that line graph to this, to the aside, here's how the line graph and summary would sort of be merged together in the aside. And what that did was it removed some of the unnecessary elements, and we're able to use the key here as well as the high-level summary to speak to the line graph as well. One thing that, you know, it's worth considering for this, the affordance that we have, is line graphs scale really well. So whether you're on mobile, large desktop monitors, or an aside like this, we can still visually tell the story we want to. If you make this larger, it's not going to be that much clearer just because it's larger. You still see the changes over time. So how this layout would translate to our current styling would look like this. So the good news is we brought the most important thing to the top, which is the vulnerabilities. But on this iteration, some of the concerns that we had is summary isn't really quite as, it's not surfaced as clearly as we'd like. It's an improvement from the other one, yes, but it's not quite as clear and prominent as we'd like. The key here is also nice because we've eliminated the need for 2 different elements, and we've put together the key and the summary, but it's disconnected from the severity labels. So that is a concern we had. And in terms of the actual data visualization that we have, this may not even be the right one. We're not necessarily comparing vulnerabilities against each other like you would say, you know, or something like that. You're wanting to see the severity, how it's changed over time individually. So maybe a line graph isn't even the best option there if that's the story we want to tell with our data. There is also another consideration, is that we want to show where this data is coming from. So this is another problem that's kind of outside the scope of this recommendation, but the data that's being shown here is updated from the most recent branch on a project, the most recent default branch. And so we haven't told that to the user. They don't have any indication other than reading the documentation of where this data is coming from. So that's something we want to fix. And one of the things is offering the user an understanding of what projects have been recently tested or haven't been tested. So that's another consideration that we wanted to have in terms of a layout and how that might live in the layout. So with these points in mind, we iterated on this version. So what we did is we really tightened up the summary and the visual that we wanted to show of vulnerabilities over time. We aligned the different severity levels with the ones that we're using in the table so that we can visually correlate the two, the user can. And we have an area here that could include some of the update data that we that I was speaking to, the default branch that we know we want to add. Now, some of the outstanding questions that we have here is, this is a little less minimal of a change than the other one, because we already have the line graphs that way. Just the development of this would this be feasible? But I think we're still kind of working on questions with that with our development team. As a first step then, how this would translate visually would look something like this. But I want to go back here, and I want to ask the team for a question. One thing that we changed here is, you may have noticed in the other ones, there was actually a toggle for the visual, 30, 60, 90 days. And we just defaulted as a convention to show the last 30 days in this visual. The idea there is, we're at such an early stage that maybe if we could minimize some of the configuration or options that we have, maybe we could have a little bit better feedback. And again, really the most important thing here is the actual vulnerability management of the vulnerabilities. So kind of focusing more on that area. But what are your thoughts on just having it show the last 30 days, for example?
I'll jump in since no one else is. Yeah, when I think about how we look at the severity of vulnerabilities at GitLab, even, we're definitely looking at them over time and wanting to see where things are cropping up. So the short answer is, I don't know, but I would be very cautious about only showing 30, and I'd want to ask. I think it would be fair in this case to start by asking our internal security team, since they really are subject matter experts in this. And if you get a really strong response from them, then you could probably feel more confident. If not, I'd be poking around with some customers to see.
I was also going to say, just to add to what Christy said, which I agree with. When you first talked about the job to be done, I had a question about it, right? So you said, I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was, you want to see things kind of all in one place and holistically and over time, right? But my question was, well, why? Like, what's the underlying goal there? And maybe that might point to more details on how people would want the data to be displayed over time.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think filling in some historical context onto this, as well as what we call the dashboard, it really it's a minimal early stage sort of MVP that was trying to tackle two different user types. So there's one that wants to actually just manage and triage the vulnerabilities, and that's just into of it with this table here. And then there's the other that's more kind of at a high level CISO level that wants to see how their team is tracking over time. And so they're kind of put together. That's one of the questions. This is a good candidate for like product discovery to kind of figure out how, like, do we want, and that's another thing here is I put the header vulnerability management because it's a little bit more oriented towards that. But, oh, and Philip just joined us as well. And he brings up a great point that, maybe we need to kind of separate the two, because this may be just more of a management and triage center. And then there may be another area where the more CISO type of role could get an understanding of what their team's efforts has looked like historically. So yeah, I think that we probably want to focus on the management portion of it because it gives them the actionable items to solve vulnerabilities. So that's why it's kind of proposing this concept of making this a little bit leaner to see what type of feedback comes in.
Is that something where maybe we could do a quick A/B test? Since you've got the prototypes, a pretty quick question for participants to answer, I would think.
Yeah, at bare minimum internally. And some of this is as well has been influenced by Dennis, who's one of our security engineer experts, and he leaned more towards the actual management side of it and was kind of indifferent about the visuals. But I think that as a next step, I definitely want to at least get in front of our internal team and see if we can't get some more A/B testing on that.
And we've got Catherine is on the call. Catherine, because I mean, ideally we would ask for both internal and external feedback if we can, if it makes sense. Catherine, do you have any feedback on how difficult that would be for us to do?
Sorry, I just joined the call. But if you follow up with me, I can think about it.
That's totally fair.
Have you all done much like write testing? Are you all familiar with that? The idea of a write test?
Tell me more.
I don't remember the acronym. It's like rapid iterative. I don't know what it stands for, but it's actually really simple. It's a usability test, except that the way you do it is you find like just maybe 2 people and you do a very quick test with maybe 1 task or 2 tasks, whatever it is you're trying to understand. And then you get that feedback immediately and you make changes to your prototype right then. And then you do 2 more maybe. And you might do like 2 or 3 rounds of that so that maybe you get like a total of 6 people. But in between you can make some changes as you get feedback. It's really just like kind of a guerrilla quick way to get user feedback and make edits. And you do it when you have something like wireframe or prototype.
I think that would be a great next step for us. Just to validate this, if we wanted to make a case, for example, Sparklines, which is a little less change here, that could at least help drive that conversation much better.
Yeah, and those sessions can be fast. Like if you're just really wanting to know if the Sparklines are, if people understand them, or if, what kind of value they provide, what they might do with that data, it could just be like a couple 15-minute sessions.
Yeah, that's a nice idea. And it seems like we could start pretty easily with internal participants on that and get probably the bulk of the feedback. So by the time we're getting it in front of customers, it's much closer. Not to say, by the way, that this is not close. I have no idea, but.
Yeah. And I'll throw it out there too. We're definitely on the hunt for customers at the moment. We found 1 or 2 that maybe we may be able to talk to in July. So if anyone on the call knows of any that use Secure actively, that we could even maybe get this in front of, that would be great. Or even feedback from their usage of the existing dashboard.
Yeah, I'll say, I don't think that it even necessarily has to be people who are using our security tools. I mean, this is just general, how do you want to see security information? So this is where we probably have Nicole ping Twitter, and I'm sure we'd get some quick responses. It's surprising how effective that is.
Awesome. Love it.
Yeah, I definitely agree with everything that was just mentioned there. Awesome.
Yeah. And I wanted to kind of say like one more thing about the chart is that like it's trying to serve so many purposes that it's not doing anything well. So like, do we want to be able to tailor the chart to serve towards active users of the vulnerability list, like the security analysts, so that they're getting what they need out of the chart? Or do we really want it to serve someone who's more like Kathy's position or a CISO so that they're able to get more out of the chart? And right now it's doing neither of those well. So it comes with that, like, it's the many-faced God of our dashboards. So I think if you're going to A/B test and you're A/B testing with security analysts, you're going to hear something very different than if you're testing with security directors who want to see that more. Like Splunk is a competitor in this chart, really, because there's all this like great charting, or very similar to like Periscope, but for security, right? So you're going to get kind of mixed reviews either way when you combine the information, if you're looking at both those roles. So I think we should just like define what the goal of this information should be.
Yeah, I think and that goes back to, I think, what Philippe was pointing out, that this would be a way to find out whether or not you even need to have two different displays or two different views. And I would just say, make sure that you're talking to both audiences when you're putting this in front of people, and then you'll come out and feel much more confident, because that's a lot of what the testing is about, is the confidence of how close are we. And based on that information, by the way, you could then decide, okay, this is not appropriate for this audience, and that's fine. We're not worried about this audience right now. We're about this audience first, and we'll think about this audience later. It doesn't have to stop you from releasing something.
Totally.
Yeah, and I think that would be such a great driver for some of our like next steps in terms of who we want to solve for and so on. Yeah, well, those are all the questions. I don't know if there was any other thoughts about the layout that came to mind, if you think that this helped kind of surface the primary data, or any other thoughts that came to mind. I didn't see anyone else next on the list, so I think we have a minute.
I asked the question in the chat, but I'll read it aloud. You were in the middle of a story, so I was wondering about the list layout next to the graphs, as the graph is like time-based, correct? If the table actually surfaces any vulnerability surface dates, so when they pop up, as to, hey, this is actually a problem. As that ties it closer to the sidebar in that case.
I'm sorry, you cut out there for a bit, so I think I missed part of that.
I'll make it shorter. So my question basically is, has there been thought about showing dates for the severities, or the vulnerabilities rather, in the table layout?
Yeah. There is some efforts. I think it's outside of this. There's a couple of linked efforts too that show even kind of better organized the table outside of this issue. But right here, this update status is hoping to help out with this, which is to say, where did this data actually come from? We have it in the depths of our documentation, and it's from the most recent branch. So we want to at least show that. But also, yes, show that when the specific vulnerability came in.
Nice, yeah. Because I was wondering, like, if I'm not a security engineer, but I would like to know, in a certain period of time, which severity or which vulnerabilities were critical or were high, and scale down the list to the things that I actually care about. Perhaps make these things. Be each other's context. Like you can scope it down to the time frame you're interested in.
Yeah, and that's another issue we're going to open as a result of it. It's a little outside of front end. I think that there was some challenges there because vulnerabilities aren't first-class objects yet. But it's also some feedback that we got from Dennis. He said it drives him nuts if he comes in the week. Like after a weekend on Monday, he wants to put in the weekend what vulnerabilities that were surfaced. So we have a bit of a technical constraint there, but it's definitely on the radar.
Gotcha.
You asked about feedback on the rearrangement of the content hierarchy, and I'll say I think this is a huge improvement. It's such a better use of real estate. It does such a better job of surfacing more important information just at a glance. So it seems like a very meaningful change to me. And my only question, so now I have some just style questions. And by the way, it looks good. But then I start thinking about how does this align with the rest of the product and with pajamas? These are nitpicky questions, and you may not even be ready for them, so you can tell me if you're not. But when I look at the table layout on 2.png, and I look at, let's see, I think it's still changing. Oh, the screen might be, there we go. The way that we're doing the page header and where the filters live with the borders and the background look different to me than how we do those in the rest of the product. So is that intentional? Is that just because that's the level of fidelity we're at? Can you just tell me more?
Yeah, it was intentional. It was intentional to add the vulnerability management header there to kind of drive the conversation on where is the user. If we're hoping that the table is a place to go and triage and kind of filter down, it maybe is more of a management than a dashboard per se. So I wanted to get some feedback about that, which we did get some interesting feedback in terms of like, we're not sure if it's a management center yet or so on. So yeah, and it was also trying to also utilize the space that we have so that we don't push the vulnerabilities down any further. So it was those two reasons.
Yeah, that all makes sense. And by the way, I think it's the right choice to surface the page title. No question on that. I'm asking a super tactical question, which is literally around background colors, borders, and how basically consistency with the rest of the product. And maybe that's something where you could just reach out to Jeremy, since we're thinking about all of this stuff anyway right now.
Yeah.
And nothing is written in stone, right? Because we're still building out the design system. So just sync up and just make sure that we're doing things in consistent ways and making scalable decisions.
Yeah, definitely. And and another thing that was outside of is this header portion is a little bit tighter than the one we have now. But yeah, I'll keep Jeremy updated as those updates.
Yeah,
there's a case to be made.
Yeah, exactly.
If
we're making the decisions deliberately, that's one thing. And Hyana's working on tables right now. So maybe this is a use case that you put in front of her and say, hey, sometimes we're going to need to have real tight tables and here are the reasons why. And then we add those into the specs. But yeah, we just want to be deliberate. And then also if we're making decisions like that, make sure that they're documented so that if we need to use them again, we're doing it consistently. So.
Will do.
Yeah. I loved watching you go through this, hearing your thought process, seeing you take it from low fidelity to high fidelity. I mean, this was incredibly well considered. This is great. Really, really enjoyed it.
Awesome. Thanks. I think we're just a minute short of time. Really appreciate everyone sharing their thoughts. And if you have any other, ping me and drop in the issue and let us know. And again, there's some really cool issues that I put in there that are related to this. So,
and Philippe, in the chat, just so you don't miss it, he had a comment, and it's actually it's pretty darn good one. So just make sure you catch it before you close out.
Okay.
Yeah,
cool.
You can just add a label next to the vulnerabilities with a new, for example, if they are for the last 24 days, 24 hours, or the last week. But the new design is absolutely great. Being able to have these two metrics into a singular chart, it really makes sense. We don't need to know the data compared to the others. It doesn't make sense. So having some trends, it's the only thing that matters. This portion is going to be used not for reporting, but just for us. If suddenly this week I have 1,000 new critical vulnerabilities, I need to know when they started to appear on the dashboard. So with that, I can spot, okay, it was on Wednesday, what occurred on Wednesday, and then I can investigate. If I don't have that, I'm lost completely. So great, kudos, I love that.
All right, thank you.
Right.
Great work.
All right, later. Appreciate it.
Bye, thanks.